I like to tell people that artificial intelligence or machine learning is at its core, it's actually really simple. It's software that learns by example. I say this all the time. AI is just software that learns by example. And the other concepts involved with AI or machine learning are relatively straightforward. There's training data, there's inputs, there's outputs, there's thresholds. It's honestly at the conceptual level, it's not that complicated. But blockchain, blockchain is very complicated. The concepts are weird. They interact in weird ways. Things are named weirdly from my perspective. To validate a block doesn't mean to show that it's true in any way, which is bizarre to me. That's sort of what validation means, I think. So I find the world of blockchain quite complicated, and I've written work on the ethical implications of blockchain and what blockchain governance looks like. I'm the chief ethics officer of the Government Blockchain Association. But I still think that blockchain is confusing to most people. In fact, when I started down the path of trying to figure out what's this blockchain stuff all about, I read a bunch of material, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and every explanation was fairly horrible. That's one of the reasons I like talking to Ingrid so much, who I do incidentally quite a bit of work with. Ingrid understands blockchain really well. One of the crucial things that she'll draw attention to in our conversation is that when we're talking about blockchain, we're not just talking about cryptocurrency. In fact, cryptocurrency is a very small application of blockchain technology, and there's lots of other applications that are really interesting and important. We'll focus on in this conversation blockchain in healthcare and life sciences. That's something with which we're all familiar, and we'll talk about use cases for blockchain technology in healthcare and life sciences. We'll talk a little bit about some other use cases, financial services, etc. But what I hope you really get out of this episode is not this or that particular thing about how to apply blockchain, but I hope you get what blockchain is all about, and you can start to see here's the kinds of decisions that we need to make if we're going to develop blockchain in a way that doesn't make an ethical mess of things. So I'm going to talk to Ingrid Vasiliu-Feltes, MD, MBA. She's been risk officer, compliance officer, innovation officer. She's worked in healthcare and life sciences for many years. She is pretty much my go-to person for, Ingrid, what is going on here with most things technology? So I hope you enjoy the conversation. I'm joined today with the brilliant, is that fair to say, Ingrid Vasiliu-Feltes. Ingrid, why don't you say hello, introduce yourself, and then let's talk.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I'm sure, like you, many people out there are still wondering what the benefits of blockchain are and how is blockchain different from crypto. So I'm hoping we can address some of their concerns or elements that are still causing a lot of debates.
Okay, great. So let me just first set the stage a little bit. As I understand blockchain, I know people will use the term like it's a ledger. I find that language sort of confusing for people who are not very familiar with ledgers. But essentially, it is a way of keeping record of transactions. If I send you some money or an NFT, or if you send it to me, it keeps track of that. And it does it such that there's a copy of that transaction in many, many computers, right? A distributed network of computers. And it's made such that any change in my, as it were, digital notebook simultaneously occurs in your digital notebook. So there's no tampering. And anytime a block is added to the chain, that's just a new recording of transactions, and it gets simultaneously added to all the computers at once. How's that for obviously a very basic conception of what blockchain technology is?
From a very basic perspective, I think it's great. If you would want to add maybe something that also captures the technology that underlies it, so something about mathematics and cryptography, I think that would help too, because it's very different than all other technologies we've used so far for recording or moving data from one place to another.
Yes, that's, if you like, that's the how of blockchain.
Yeah.
I described the what of blockchain, what it is. It's simultaneous recordings of transactions across many computers. And the how has to do with the math that you're talking about. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
Well, yes, compared to many other technologies we've been using for years, this one uses mathematics at the foundation and specifically also cryptography. That is a combination of numbers and hashes that allow us to keep all that information much more secure than traditional. Now, I only say much more secure and not fully secure because nothing is fully secure in this
Sure.
world. So everything that we build can also be hacked by a smart cookie in the future. So we always
Sure.
say.
Right. Okay, so that's pretty simple in a way. It's just simultaneous recordings of transactions across multiple digital notebooks.
One more
Yeah.
explanation maybe for our audience that I've learned, it's a almost anecdote that I've used in the past, but it worked.
Yeah.
So for our audience, if they want to imagine that you have a virtual accountant, a virtual FedEx system, a virtual lawyer, and a virtual statistician all in one package that can instantly do what you want them to do, that would also very nicely capture all the functions that a blockchain ledger can do. And that
Okay, so
sometimes helps
yeah.
people to think about
So
what
give me
you
an
usually
example.
yeah.
Let's go through an example. So, and one thing that I'd really like to draw attention to is, as of course there's a massive difference between blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency runs on blockchain technology, but there are other kinds of applications. So, could you give us an example of using blockchain technology, and maybe you can sort of intersperse that with references to the virtual FedEx, etc.
Sure. So there are a lot of examples, and like you already said, cryptocurrency or digital currencies are just one tiny application of ledger technologies or of blockchain technologies. So there are numerous others, and we alluded to just a minute ago, but one very simple one is auditing capability. So blockchain technologies uniquely lend themselves to an auditing capacity. So what we currently do in the any kind of industry from an auditing perspective is always retroactive, very cumbersome, takes a lot of not only human effort, but also paperwork, duplication of efforts. A lot of errors happen. It can cost institutions months in a row and thousands, if not millions of dollars to do. When you use a blockchain technology at the underpinning of whatever industry you are, you can be in finance, or you can be in healthcare, or you can be in energy, you can be in agriculture, doesn't matter what. But if you build your platform on a blockchain, you have instant auditability. So you can have an audit anytime you want, every second. If you want, you're always having everything ready. So
So again,
yeah.
but give me a really concrete example. Auditing what? What are we recording on the blockchain? What might a company
Sure.
use to record on a blockchain? Why not? Why use blockchain? Why not just use a regular old digital platform?
So we can
Yeah.
record a lot of things on a blockchain. We can record who, what, how accesses whatever system we're accessing. And we can record also the transactions, and not only the transactions, the speed, the frequency, for what reason, for what purpose. So let's take, if it's for finance, maybe people know about Zelle or Venmo or any other payment system, right?
Yeah.
As an example, the blockchain there would transact what devices communicated with each other to have a transaction occur, what people, what individuals from a digital identity perspective access that system, the quantity of what was transacted, the speed of which it was transacted, and everything else that we might want to add on that. Now, the reason you would say, well, can we do that with other
Right.
platforms too? Well, the benefit in that specific example is that you're using the capabilities of the blockchain to do a transaction in an automated way without human intermediaries. So there's no more intermediary, and that can be a person or an organization that needs to intervene, and the transaction can happen because it is embedded into the fabric of the blockchain, which we refer to as a smart contract, meaning the rules, and we can call them business rules or regulatory rules or any kind of other rules or conventions we want to make, but it's already embedded. And therefore, if everything is correct, the same way the rules were set up at the beginning, in the case of Venmo, if there are two authenticated users, or in the case of Zelle, if there are two banks that are authorized to have transactions, it goes much faster, almost instant, as opposed to in the past when it would take, sometimes days in a row. So you get the speed and the accuracy and the ability. When we say audit, is to have the trail instantly of who accessed, why they accessed, what they did, in what format, what quantity, and what speed. All of those are instantly recorded.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm being naive. So look, I'm an individual. I use Zelle. I send Ingrid some money. That's recorded, right? Doesn't run on blockchain. It's instantaneous, right? I send the money and 2 seconds later you confirm receipt of it. There's no blockchain involved. What do I need blockchain for?
Well, if you send it traditionally, there are sometimes up to 15 intermediaries that you might not see. So
Sure.
what you don't see is the key in this answer. So in a traditional way, the way we've been doing it for many years before we had any blockchain capabilities was very different. So a lot of things had to happen on the background. Now, for you as a user, before, all you saw is that the money got there, but you didn't see all those other steps. And why do
Okay.
we care is because in each of those little steps, you have vulnerability possible. You lose accuracy, you lose time. And of course, there are a lot of errors that can happen, not to mention also that you pay fees for each of those intermediaries. So it's also a financial benefit that we're getting, which we haven't touched on yet.
So it should be, in principle, more something like more efficient from an engineering perspective because it doesn't go through all these different systems along the way to get to you, which means that there are less opportunities for things breaking down, things being hacked, etc. And then from a user perspective, from my perspective, at least in some cases, it means that there's no intermediary who can take a fee, can take some percentage of what I'm saying to you.
Yes. Now, the ease of transaction, that's important to discuss a little bit. A careful analysis and decision what we put on a blockchain is very important. In this case, we discussed the simple one, which is finances. But in other cases, people need to be careful. You don't want to overload. Not everything has to go on the chain. Only the most essential information that you need to protect and that is amenable to a blockchain transaction, because otherwise you're going to overload it and you lose all these efficiencies we talked about. Then you actually slow it down. Go ahead.
So let's take another example, one from that you've got deep experience in healthcare.
Yeah.
So there's lots of talk about putting people's medical records on a blockchain. So this is totally, this is not a example of financial service. I'm storing, I take it. Is it me? Or is it a doctor? Somehow my medical data is getting onto the blockchain. Can you walk me through what that might look like to have our medical data on a blockchain, and how might that benefit the patient or the doctors or the medical community or society at large?
Sure. So there are multiple uses, but the one that you reference is, let's say, if we have a self-sovereign patient medical record, so the patient would own it and could share their data with whomever they would want. So the first benefit why people get agitated about this is so that patients can truly have ownership over their data, because even now they're supposed to, but we all know how complicated it is to get access to your records. So although legally you own your medical record, it's not easy to get a hold of it. If you have it on a blockchain, patients can truly access any single element of their record, even in a granular fashion. And we can talk a little bit later about different types of blockchains, but let's talk now general. The benefit would be not only that they have the ownership, but more importantly, that they can share with whomever they want without requesting permission from anyone else. And the third benefit is that they could access also at a granular level, even up to discrete data points, as opposed to all record or no record. You could decide that I just want to show you a lab value because I want you to see that. And I could decide that my oncologist has to see only certain elements from my record versus my GYN, another one, versus my dentist, another one, versus my anesthesiologist, another one. So it's the versatility as well, not only the fact that they have ownership. In the future, that they can also make sure that if there is an opportunity for gamification or for monetization, they would have the right to get in or out of that option compared to the more complicated version right now. I would want to tell our audience, though, the bigger benefit is even thinking about the blockchain as a universal health record opportunity, not just for the patient. So when you think about it now, we're all generating medical data, so like the medical Internet of Things. And all that data right now is being shared in a very inefficient, costly way. It costs the United States almost 23% of GDP to manage this. So having the blockchain allows all stakeholders. So let's say health plans, hospitals, physicians, patients, their families, pharmacies, laboratories, any other institutes that might process your genome or your biopsy results or your blood management. I mean, we can go endless, but that whole health ecosystem can now, if we have a proper blockchain foundation, we can decide through business rules what tiny elements each of these stakeholders can access. So the health plan should only see certain things that are necessary for payments. The hospitals will only what they need to provide the care to you. My primary care physician, something else. The pharmacy, the lab, everybody can just access what they need when they need it instantly, which is the benefit. And then out of this, everybody can also audit it instantly. And you have that immutable record that you mentioned, right? So the fact that you cannot go back and erase, which for healthcare is really important so that someone can truly have the full spectrum. And we have to mention it too. There is a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse, sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional in healthcare, like in other industries. But healthcare is one that has quite robust double-digit numbers in the losses and percent of fraud. And so having a blockchain there would help with all these elements that we've been spending 50 years on, like value-based care, equitable health, that are trying to give the care and to allocate the care to where it's needed most, as opposed to wasting resources where they're not needed. And blockchain would allow that because it can be embedded in those rules that we just talked about.
Okay, that was a lot. So let me try to pick some of this apart. Currently, my medical data is at that, on the digital platform or the software that
hospital or Dr. X. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I had an MRI recently. That data lives in that radiology center. I had to go take it to my surgeon, which required me to literally go. They wouldn't email it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In order to get the MRI, I had to physically go to the building and get a CD of
which
my
no
MRI.
one uses. Mm-hmm.
Right, and then take it to my surgeon so they can put it in their CD reader on their computer to look at my MRI. Okay, that's it feels archaic. It doesn't have to be that way. I can imagine that they allow you to email it, but let's put even that to the side. They won't allow you to email it, but let's say there's some other secure digital way of transferring it. Right, like when my accountant sends me my tax returns, he sends it to me with a protected password and all that stuff. But the point is that even if it were easier, there's still, I take it the point is something like, there's a way in which all that information is siloed in the various healthcare places I go to, the walk-in clinic, the radiologist, my surgeon, my other surgeon, my dentist, as you said. And if all of my healthcare data were on the blockchain, on a blockchain, then number one, that's nice because now it's not siloed anymore. It's all in one place. And number two, the big thing there is that I would, if the blockchain is created in the right sort of way, I alone, tell me if this is wrong, I alone would be able to sort of control the gates about who has access to what information on that chain. So I give this information to my health insurance company. I give permission for this information to be had by this surgeon, but not this other one, so on and so forth. So I get greater control over who has access to my medical data under what conditions.
Correct. But then we haven't talked also about the fact that it's also a matter of timing. So in the current system, not only do you need to sign a lot of authorizations, but also the accuracy of that record and whatever you received is not checked until many months after. And also the payment that you make for that MRI to get it, even if you just pay $6, right? There are many steps until those dollars get to whom they belong. And then the question would be, why would you have to pay for something that belonged to you in the first place? But that's a legal question. Now, larger, even when we think about payments in the healthcare ecosystem, which is the biggest benefit of using a blockchain in the example that you gave for healthcare, do you know that today, even if you pay your copay or whatever you need to, by the time that dollar gets to the physician or to the hospital, it can sometimes be more than a year. In the best circumstances, it can be weeks or months, but sometimes it can be years. Not to mention that health plans, by the time they can do their reconciliation, it's also sometimes several months or a year. Not to mention Medicare and Medicaid. So a lot of time is being wasted instead of all of it being instant, the same way we have it now in the finance industry. So imagine if everybody would actually be able to get their money when they need it, and we could check for fraud and abuse before it actually happens, because with the blockchain, it wouldn't even occur. It cannot, because it will not go through. So a lot of
Right.
benefits for healthcare and life sciences.
So we have the patient gets greater control over their
Mm-hmm.
data. There's greater efficiency in payments, or throughout the whole system of efficiency in payments. It's all auditable.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's any misappropriation of funds, we can find that quickly. It's quicker access by the people who need access to it. And to take your earlier point, since there are so many fewer intermediaries, there's less places for there to be hacks, breakdown of a system, and so on.
But I want to emphasize, because this is maybe the most important one in healthcare and life sciences. If the rules are designed properly at the beginning, you cannot even have fraud, waste, or abuse, because there's no duplication that can occur. There's no error that can occur, because the rules are embedded and there's nothing that will go through. So for instance, I can't file 5 times for the same beneficiary something. I can't enter 6 services. As you know, for instance, for Medicare, the biggest fraud is ordering durable equipment. It's in the multiple millions of dollars every year. So let's say I'm even dead and someone orders 6 wheelchairs for me and 7 braces and whatever. And that's common. So imagine now, or that I had 7 MRIs per day, or that I had who knows what other services that are obviously inappropriate. So by using the blockchain to its maximum capacity and very wisely, you can embed these rules from the beginning, and then you don't even have that happen. And if anybody still has doubts, that would be probably the easiest way to choose and to show the benefits of that. Credentialing is another big one. Do you know that sometimes doctors wait 3 months to be credentialed in the hospital where that's maybe a sister hospital? So you're already credentialed in 15 hospitals, and to be credentialed in the 16th one, you need to wait months in a row. The hospitals are losing sometimes $15,000 a day because they can't get a physician credentialed. So a lot of dollars are being lost that could be solved just like this. Now,
Incredible.
It's important, we haven't mentioned to our audience, to talk a little bit about what type of blockchain, because not all blockchains are created equal. So it's really important, and I always like to emphasize, if we even utter the word blockchain, we need to specify what type of blockchain. So is it a private blockchain, public blockchain, a hybrid blockchain, or a consortium blockchain? And each of them have different benefits and different disadvantages, let's say. So very important.
Okay, so I see the advantages. Sounds incredible. I imagine there's analogous kinds of benefits in other industries. So we've talked a little bit about financial services. We've talked about healthcare. By the way, I take it that one other advantage is that if, let's say, there's a pandemic going on, and say the CDC or some other relevant organization would greatly benefit from having access to the healthcare data of many, 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 many patients, but not all the data, but we could share data more easily with relevant government authorities in the case of, say, a global emergency. Is that right?
Absolutely, and you hit it on the nail. So, for instance, the consortium blockchain would be uniquely feasible for a public health crisis emergency management system.
Okay, so let's do this. So one thing that you said, I want to hear more about the 4 types, and I want to talk more about the 4 types of blockchain. But you said 2 things that really struck me. One was you said something like, as long as the rules are set the right way from the start, which makes me think, okay, well, what are the right rules? Who gets to decide them? How do they get decided upon? What if you don't choose the right rules? Can you undo them? That's one. And then you also used the phrase, if you've created the blockchain wisely, which again just leads me to questions about, okay, what does it mean to create a blockchain wisely? So I want to talk about what it is. What are the kinds of rules that we're talking about? How should they get decided upon? What does the ethical governance of blockchain look like? And I take it that your answer to that is, first, in order to understand how to properly ethically govern a blockchain application or a blockchain, you need to make a decision about what kind of blockchain is appropriate for your use case, whether it's private, public, hybrid, or consortium. Do I have that right?
Correct. And if you choose the wrong one, everything will fall to pieces and you wasted your money and your time.
Okay, so let's talk about these four. Run us through these distinctions.
Sure. So a private blockchain, as the name already tells you, let's pretend I'm Walmart and I want to create a private blockchain system only for Walmart. So all the benefits we described then would be only available to the Walmart ecosystem. Now, if I am, let's say, Amazon, and I want to create a blockchain system that helps me, if I only create a private one, I will only help Amazon with their internal benefits that we just described. But if Amazon wants to use it also for their suppliers, vendors, and customers, then just a private one obviously would not work because they wouldn't be part of that ecosystem. So they need a dynamic option to interact with numerous other parties that are highly variable, right? There are an endless number of potential customers, even if the vendors are known. So therefore, they could choose to have a private blockchain for Amazon's internal operations. They could choose to have a hybrid blockchain for all their vendors that they know and that are authorized. They know exactly with whom they have relationships with. And then they could have something like a consortium blockchain where certain elements are available to all their customers that want to order things from them, as an example. So
okay, so hold on. So a public blockchain, I take it, is where everyone's invited, right?
yes,
As long as you've got the technology to sort of sign on, if you need a computer, et cetera. But in principle, everyone is invited. You
yes,
want to come on the Ethereum blockchain and
correct. That's the easiest one.
purchase NFTs. That's for everyone. A private blockchain is one that obviously restricts the set of users who can get on. So, for instance, to oversimplify, you've got to have you have to have an Amazon email address in order to access this thing, something like that, right? That would be a private blockchain. And so we
would hope more than an email. You would have much
of
more.
course, I'm just giving an example.
Yes,
So it's anyone who, it's probably going to be a subset of people who work at Amazon who have access to that blockchain, right?
Yeah, you can decide whom it is. When it's private, though, you predetermine who is part of it. That's the key.
Sure.
You predetermine and pre-select, as opposed to in the other ones, it can be unknown members that will be allowed to join.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about hybrid then, which is going to be a hybrid of private and public. So that means, to put it in a confusing way, it's invited. Everyone is invited, and only a select few are invited. So
let's give examples. So let's take I'm a bank or a hospital or a health plan. So if I'm a bank, I have certain information. Let's say I'm whatever, Citibank. I want to use certain elements that are part of the blockchain only for my Citibank internal operations. No one else needs to have access to that. But I also want to use the blockchain technology that I spend a lot of time and money on for certain transactions with external members. So then certain features would be only available to Citibank private blockchain users. Other features would be available only to the Citi external customers, vendors, partners, whatever, that's out of the, and then there might be certain features that are available for both in that middle portion. Because that would be, for instance, what you use when you do a wire transfer, right? That minimal information that both parties need to use, that's in that hybrid version.
So the analogy is something like it's a website, a website where you need certain permissions to access certain parts of that site.
Correct. And then in healthcare, to give example, exactly. So let's say health plans don't need to see all the details. They only need to see what they are allowed to see to pay for the service. They don't need to always see all your confidential information. So same thing there. The doctor would have all of it. The hospital administration, for instance, might just have what they need to process the claim. The health plan might have another portion that they need to pay the claim. And then the patient should have all of it all the time, in theory.
Right. Sure. Right. Okay. So there's just a Venn diagram.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Where the overlapping bit is.
And to your pandemic analogy, a great example there would be also our vaccination cards. If we had everything on a blockchain, it would have been so easy for everyone. That would have been obviously available in a hybrid portion or in a consortium or federated type of way. That portion everybody had to see so that you can show it to your employer, show it to a museum or wherever you had to go, or restaurant and so forth. See?
So it sounds like if you've got private, you've got public, you've got hybrid, private and public. That sounds like an exhaustive list, but yet there's this other category, consortium. What could that possibly mean?
Well, in the consortium, you have separate entities that might also want to share only tiny portions, not as much as in the hybrid. So there might be independent organizations who already have hybrids with their own vendors and partners, but then there's a
Yeah,
tiny bit. So a great example might be, let's say, if we would want NATO, to have a blockchain system, that would be one,
sure.
or the European Union Commission could have a consortium one, because you have a lot of independent institutions that might have their own blockchains and their own
Yeah.
organization, and then you have a tiny bit that they need to be joining, as an example.
So okay, let me see if I have this right. It sounds like when we're talking about a public blockchain, we're really talking about, I mean, there's the blockchain and there's the application that lives on top of the blockchain, right?
Correct.
And so let's just say we're using the Ethereum blockchain. You can build different kinds of apps on top of it for financial services, for healthcare, for mining, for fashion, whatever, doesn't matter. And so, but it's a single app running on a single blockchain, right? And I take it that if I have a hybrid, it's still a single app running on a single blockchain. It's just that it's hybrid, so some people have access to some information that other people don't have access to on that in that app. Is that right?
Tiny bit, I would do a nuance. I don't want
Yeah,
our audience to understand it's only one app. You would have a customized tech stack, because it's multiple apps that would
yeah,
be required for each industry. But
sure.
in theory, it's more about authentication and permission, and the layers within the blockchain that would allow that, not just one app. I wouldn't word it maybe with one app, because I think it's confusing.
Maybe the analogy is like this. I don't know if this is going to be helpful. There's, my company has a cloud. There's Dropbox. There's Google Drive. And maybe there's some way, those are two cloud systems. You're going to have lots of apps running in those clouds, right? Maybe my company uses Dropbox and your company uses Google Drive. But there could be some shared space where those things can talk to each other. And that would be like a consortium cloud.
That's much
And
better. Yes, that's much better.
and so a blockchain consortium is, I've got my, let's say, private blockchain suite of apps running on the blockchain. You might use a different blockchain. Is that right? So you might not be on the Ethereum blockchain. You're on some other blockchain with its suite of apps that you use. And then the consortium consists of the places where our blockchains can intersect.
Yeah, that's a great example. Or let's take another example would be if all the telecommunication companies would decide to be running on blockchain, and they would decide that there is one feature that they'll all create a consortium for, which is like a 911 call. You can break through everything, and the 911 call, it doesn't matter what carrier you would be on, doesn't matter what blockchain you use, should be able to allow you to place that call, no matter what you use, as an example.
Great. Okay, so now we've got the four different kinds of blockchain. And now we can ask our question, and this is really just the first question in proper governance of blockchain. I think we're going to have to do a part 2 of this. Why would choosing some types of blockchains be a disaster, ethical and otherwise?
Well, for one is that you can lose the type of control you wanted to gain, and the ability to access the data, and who is governing that. So as we talked about, if you are in a hybrid version, you'll have to have some shared governance of that hybrid portion. And then, of course, if you are in the public one, then if your goal was to be able to use it only for your internal purposes, you chose the wrong blockchain. And then if
Right.
you're opposite, so let's say I'm the CDC and I was hoping to help everything that I was aiming for in terms of public health, and I choose the wrong one that's only designed for private, it's a total mismatch. So it will not serve the purpose that you want, and it will be completely opposite in terms of what it can help you with. So you're going to just complicate yourself and make things harder as opposed to easier. The whole goal is to use blockchain to increase efficiency or increase safety or save you money or save you human effort. I mean, one of those, hopefully.
So, right, obviously, if I want to keep things private, choosing a public blockchain,
Yeah.
bad idea. When would it be a bad idea to use a hybrid chain?
Well, it's not necessarily bad. You have to do a feasibility analysis. So you have to decide, do you have enough reason to make a portion of it hybrid? So is there any other way you can solve that problem that you have? Because that's the most important message I think we want to convey to our audience. I always say, although I'm a big advocate for blockchain, if there is something else that can get the job done with less money, less time, and doesn't require as much fancy skills as blockchain to
Sure, yeah.
maintain it, then please use that other thing. So a thorough feasibility analysis should really be the key to this, because not everything needs to use blockchain, and not all the data belongs on the blockchain. But if you decided you really need one, you have to take into consideration the effort that it takes to maintain a hybrid, right? And then also the scalability issues and the timing, because the more complex you get, you lose some of the speed and you lose some of the ability to just govern the way you want to. And then, of course, the more people in there, the more opportunities also for things to go wrong. But scalability, I would say, is a big one to think about.
Okay, last thing that I want to talk about. We're talking about a really important decision that gets made about how to develop a blockchain. And there's a question as to who makes that decision, which is, again, raises the issue of governance. And one thing that we haven't touched upon yet is talking about the decentralized nature of blockchain. So it's decentralized in the sense that the data is not stored in some single, server or a set of servers, which means there's not a single point of attack. It's distributed or decentralized in the sense that the data is distributed across and processed across, however many nodes are in the network, however many thousands of computers or whatever it is the blockchain consists of, is maintained by. So, and then I think people tend to think, oh, it's decentralized, so it's governance. How, decisions made about how to create and run the blockchain is decentralized. And now it starts to sound like a kind of libertarian wonderland. There's no central entity, there's no big authority, there's no big government, there's just, the people of the network. But I think that's clearly not right. So can you talk to us a little bit about whether decentralization amounts to anything more than that, and how it relates to making really fateful, important, business and ethically impactful decisions around how you develop a blockchain?
It's a great question, and I think it might require, session two. But to just give a little bit the essential answer, don't confuse what happens before you build and before you decide what to put on the blockchain with how then the actual constructed blockchain will store data and transact data and safeguard data. That's the big difference. There are still people who need to make decisions and build those rules, and there are still people who need to decide which blockchain to choose, like we just talked. And there are still people who need to very carefully decide what data belongs on the chain or off the chain. There are still people who are going to decide whom to let into a private one, what type of hybrid one, what type of consortium one. Now, once you build it, then it's true that the data will be stored in a decentralized way, and the way it's managed is decentralized. And that's the key difference. Now, there are still elements within running a blockchain where you still have people oversight, not as much as normal, but there are still elements that belonging there. So the data that's being fed into the blockchain still needs to be vetted by someone. So that's very important. Like we always joke with AI, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So the same way here, you have to be very careful. If I load erroneous data onto the blockchain, it's not the blockchain's fault if things go wrong. So
Sure.
very important to think about the life cycle here. So thinking about blockchain governance, that's, I think, the key to understand, that before and then what happens after, very different. The other one that I think sometimes causes confusion is the notion of decentralized autonomous organizations that
Yeah.
are also one form of governance related to blockchains. And there are so many types of DAOs, but unfortunately that also causes a confusion because people think that all blockchains are run by DAOs, and that's not true. So in the future,
Right.
maybe we can talk about all the types of DAOs and then like social DAOs, collector DAOs, grant DAOs, protocol DAOs, crypto DAOs, media DAOs. I mean, there are a lot of DAOs.
Oh boy, a lot of
So
DAOs.
yes.
So before we list the 15 types of DAOs, which is
The
already
next session.
intimidating. Yeah. So when we're talking about governance and decentralization, one point that you're making, which you made from the start, is that there's various decisions about how to build the blockchain in the first place, which of course those decisions are created off-chain. They're made off-chain. In fact, they're pre-chain, right? And obviously it's going to be bound by, it's going to be governed by the small group of individuals or even the single individual who creates the blockchain. Okay. Then there are certain decisions about how the blockchain operates that are going to be ongoing. For instance, do we want this to be a source of data that gets loaded onto our blockchain? And that's going to be ongoing. Someone might propose, hey, we want to use this additional source of data and put it onto the blockchain. And someone or other, some set of people is going to have to say, here are the standards by which we approve or disapprove new sources. Here's the process. And they can say yes or no. Here's the appeals process. So there's all that kind of stuff. And then there's other kinds of really big decisions, I take it. So for instance, and this is the only time we'll talk about crypto, I think, really, there's decisions like, okay, there's arguably a bug in the code that's allowing a user to steal lots of money or to take lots of money off the chain. This is what happened with the Ethereum blockchain. And so then a relatively small group of people, the people running the Ethereum blockchain, decided to do this thing called a hard fork. Right? And that's not just a sort of managing day-to-day operations oversight. That's a big, massive governance decision. And that decision was made by just a handful of people, right?
Absolutely. But even there, I think that's the other part that we haven't touched on, and maybe we can talk in the future. We talked only about the types of blockchains and about a few elements, but there are also, don't forget, elements related to interoperability. The blockchain doesn't exist in a vacuum when you deploy it somewhere. So it has to interact and be interoperable with other things within that organization. It cannot just be suspended in outer space in a business ecosystem.
Sure.
So oftentimes when problems happen, it's because of how the blockchain is interconnected with other technologies within that organization. Very few have actually really started from scratch and built everything the right way off the ground. So then you have all these plugins and connectors that are opening it up for vulnerability. But in this case that you described, that was very specific, one type of application of a blockchain, which was crypto. Yes. The point is that there are still humans who can make a decision. Yes, very small amount of humans that have the know-how and the skills to interfere. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not some libertarian wonderland where governance of the blockchain is decentralized. There's, in fact, a small group of individuals. Okay. That was a lot. That was great. I think we have to have a part 2. We have to dive into 1001 DAOs. That could be the title of the next episode. And other really, feel like, fateful, ethical, and business decisions to be made about how you develop and maintain a blockchain.
Yeah,
and then we got to talk about interoperability and I know there's other things that you want to talk about.
Yeah, I think also one thing that I love to talk about is standards and metrics for blockchain, and in the future how it gets complicated when you combine blockchain with other technologies such as AI, or how blockchain and AI are used within the concept of digital twins or in human-computer interfaces. So as you can see, the mushroom gets bigger, and I think it's important to think about those things early as opposed to wait until everything is deployed.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ingrid. You'll have to return. There's so much more to talk about.
I hope we didn't give people a headache. So thank you for inviting.
If they're still here, they loved it, right? Who's still listening and didn't love it? All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.